Welcome to the Art of Parenting, the 5th week in our 6-week journey, gaining insights and wisdom from Jewish knowledge, ancient Jewish wisdom for raising children. Today we are doing lesson 5, which is feedback and consequences. And I know that this has been a long-awaited lesson for many of you. Throughout the course, we've mentioned, this might be an opportune time to curb your children, to get them to do this, to get them to do that, etc. And there are only 2 ways to get children to do that. And that is either by positive or negative feedback. And the question is, what is the correct way to go about that? And so as usual, we will start our lesson with a little video teaser. This is a fun one, and probably one we're all going to relate with. So please turn your attention to the video screens.
My 10-year-old son went to basketball camp for 2 weeks during the summer. On the last day, he came home with a large trophy. I was a little surprised because he's not exactly NBA material, if you know what I mean. But I was happy for him. Wow, Michael, that's a beautiful trophy. You must have really excelled. Turns out they gave every kid at the camp a trophy. Now, I'm all for building self-confidence, but I feel that rewarding kids just for showing up kind of defeats the purpose. Take chores, for example. Michael's job is to take out the garbage and empty the dishwasher. I want him to do these things as part of his contribution to the household. I don't think he should need praise or reward as incentive. In fact, it kind of bothers me that he doesn't do more to help around the house. My wife disagrees. She feels that frequent praise helps to build his self-esteem. He takes out the garbage.
Good job, Michael. That sure takes a lot of strength.
When he empties the dishwasher.
Excellent job. You stacked everything so neatly.
How would you respond?
So in case it is not obvious, today's lesson picks up directly where last week's lesson left off. Last week we discussed self-esteem, right? And we spoke about how important it is for a child to have self-esteem and to make sure that they know they're valuable, to make sure that they know their inherent value, their inherent worth. It's not dependent on something, etc. And we have to love them unconditionally and all this beautiful stuff. And now we're going to come and we're going to heap praise on them in order to encourage that, right? Or maybe we're going to tell them off, and we're going to take away from that. So the question on the table is, do praise and reward foster healthy self-esteem? And on the flip side, does criticism inhibit it? By way of opening this conversation, I'd like to ask Svetlana, if you can, please. We're on page 134 in our textbooks. If you can read text 1, which is from a very beautiful article from New York Magazine called "How Not to Talk to Your Kids" by Pro Bunsen. You'll soon see that there's some amazing research behind this article, which we'll talk about in a moment. But this first quote just opens the conversation. Go ahead.
Since the 1969 publication of The Psychology of Self-Esteem, in which Nathaniel Branden opined that self-esteem was the single most important facet of a person, the belief that one must do whatever he can to achieve positive self-esteem has become a movement with broad societal effects. Anything potentially damaging to kids' self-esteem was axed. Competitions were frowned upon. Soccer coaches stopped counting goals and handed out trophies to everyone. Teachers threw out their red pencils. Criticism was replaced with ubiquitous, even undeserved praise.
And I'm sure many of us can think of other examples of this same concept. Praise everywhere. Praise the children because we don't want to knock their self-esteem. But one of the issues is that out of an abundance of concern for our children's self-esteem, as a society, we've gone to the opposite extreme. This is very common. We are often overcorrecting for previous generations, overcorrecting for an issue that we've detected, right? I think we're starting to see this now with men. I think there are men in today's day and age that are starting to feel like the world is sexist against them because we've become so feminist, right? So this is how we work. We overcorrect to all sides without saying, why can't we just hold a healthy medium, a healthy truth? Okay. Maybe there's good to that as well, but regardless, it's the facts on the table. Simply put, I think that many of us as parents, growing up as we have in the past few generations, and arriving in 2024 and wanting to reprimand our children, the moment we have to tell our children off, we kind of like we avoid it. We don't want to punish them. We don't want to reprimand them because we've heard all the horror stories of children who were scarred for life because their parent didn't believe in them enough or didn't, et cetera, et cetera. And there's a lot of value to that. There's a lot of value in recognizing that a child's self-esteem is the most important thing. So the question on the table is, how do we go about that? Is praise and reward, is that automatically? And by the way, I want to make a quick kind of announcement, like a disclaimer for the whole class. This whole class today, we're not really going to be making a difference between praise or reward. I recognize that one of them is verbal and one of them is actionable, and the same thing with reprimand or punishment. We're not really making a difference between those two. Praise and reward are on one side, reprimand and punishment are on the other side. I may use the words interchangeably, but I think they have the same general impact on our children. And one of the cases that one of the points that we're going to be making in today's lesson is that actually it's not so much about whether we reprimand our children, about whether we praise our children, but actually about how it is done. And it turns out that if done correctly, praising our children and reprimanding our children can be extremely helpful and extremely beneficial, extremely healthy for our children. And if done incorrectly, both praise and reprimand can be extremely harmful to our children. So the question on the table is how? What is the proper way to praise our children? So learning exercise 1.A is just a good frame of reference if you want to do this. I'm not going to leave that much time for it, but if you'd like to do it, it's on page 135. And you're encouraged basically to write down 2 positive things that your child did recently and how you responded to them. Okay? Because basically, we are diving into part 1 of today's lesson. Today's lesson is divided pretty much in half. We're going to do about 35, 40 minutes on each. The first half is going to be praise and reward. The second half is going to be punishment and reprimand. So if we want to have a frame of reference to be able to come back and say, what did I gain in today's lesson about praise, about reward, then I think one of the things you might want to do is right now, before we learned anything, write down how did you respond to your child when they positively when they did something positive. But another way of having a frame of reference is by this. I'm sorry, this is actually in the next slide. I thought we had a slide for this one. Another way of doing this is actually by taking a look in your textbooks on page 136. And I would love some raise of hands here. Not everybody has their videos on. Okay, so let's do chat if we can. If you can type in the chat, here's what we're going to do, okay? We have 4 instances, 4 quotes of a parent telling something to a child. And our question is that positive praise, negative praise, or neutral? All right? Let's start with the first one. A parent looks at a child, no matter what they did, no matter what happened earlier, and the parent says to the child, "You are so smart. I am very proud." You can type in the chat, positive, negative, neutral. What do you think? We have 1 for neutral, 1 for negative. Anybody want to say positive? To just throw it? Nope, nope. Looks like we're starting to lean negative. Neutral or negative? Give it another 3 seconds. 1, 2, 3. Okay, let's move on to the second one. You're an absolute angel, the best. Everybody type in positive or negative or neutral. What do you think? Okay, we're neutral leaning positive this time. Okay, number 3. You did a great job. Look at how perfect the work is. Positive, negative, or neutral? We're all over the place. Positive, negative, negative, neutral. Okay. All right. And the last one, you worked really hard. That is wonderful. What do you guys think? Positive, positive, positive. Oh, wow. Unanimous. Thank you, folks. Okay, this is exactly what we want to talk about today. I think you guys are already on the right track. You see where this lesson is headed, but let's unpack it properly from the texts. Okay, so what is the proper way to praise? Are there any guidelines for what is the right and the wrong way to praise a child? Let's have a look at a study that was done in this regard. This is a fascinating study. It's text 2. It's a continuation of that same article from earlier. Susie, if we can ask you to read for us, please. We're on page 137, text 2.
For a few decades, it's been noted that a large percentage of all gifted students, those who score in the top 10% on aptitude tests, severely underestimate their own abilities. When parents praise their children's intelligence, they believe they are providing the solution to this problem. According to a survey conducted by Columbia University, 85% of American parents think it's important to tell their kids that they're smart. But a growing body of research and a new study from the trenches of New York public school system strongly suggests it might be the other way around. Giving kids the label smart does not prevent them from underperforming. It might actually be causing it. For the past 10 years, psychologist Carol Dweck and her team at Columbia, she's now at Stanford, studied the effect of praise on students in a dozen New York schools. Her seminal work, a series of experiments on 400 fifth graders, paints the picture most clearly. Dweck sent 4 female research assistants to New York fifth grade classrooms. The researchers would take a single child out of the classroom for a nonverbal IQ test consisting of a series of puzzles. Puzzles easy enough that all the children would do fairly well. Some of the children were praised for their intelligence. They were told, "You must be smart at this." Other students were praised for their effort. "You must have worked really hard." Then the students were given a choice of the test for the second round. One choice was a test that would be more difficult than the first, but the researchers told the kids that they'd learn a lot from attempting the puzzles. The other choice, Dweck's team explained, was an easy test, just like the first. Of those praised for their effort, 90% chose the harder set of puzzles. Of those praised for their intelligence, the majority chose the easy test. The smart kids took the cop-out.
So this is some very interesting research, but it has not gotten into the why. The research shows basically that the more we tell our children, you are smart, you are smart, you are smart, the less it motivates them actually to do more things and to grow in their smartness, which is interesting. That's not what we're looking for, right? We're looking to boost their self-esteem. We're looking to say, you are smart, and then they believe in themselves that they're smart and they go and do more things, right? More ambitious things. So why is it working that way? Why is it flipping on its head? The answer is very, very interesting. It turns out that what happened, and Dweck explains this in the article and in the original research paper, which might have been a little boring if we brought everything here. But what he explains is like this. What she explains is like this. When you praise your child and you're praising a talent, a particular talent that they have. So let's say the child was born smart and you're praising them for being smart. What happens is you send a subliminal message to your child. The most important thing, the name of the game is look smart. What is the next step? Don't risk making mistakes. If you have to look smart all the time, you're now afraid to make mistakes. So given the choice of the next test in the study or in real life, given the choice of the next opportunity, next scenario that comes their way, the child says to themselves, hold on, I can take a risk and see if I'll do well again in this new instance, or I can stay in the safe zone. I know I'm going to do well like this, and then I'll continue to be smart. And I know that my acceptance is based on being smart because my parent keeps telling me you're smart, you're smart, you're smart, right? And therefore they opt for the safer zone. So it turns out that when we praise intelligence, when we praise a natural talent, there's kind of a 4-step process that happens here. Number one is that the child begins to link the talent. Okay, so by the way, we're talking now about smart, just because it's a very common one in the Jewish world and in the American world. Intelligence is a very common one, right? But the same thing is if you start to overpraise their athletic ability or their artistic ability or anything like that, or even their kindness, by the way, right? What happens is they link that talent with their worth. Now, certainly we all want our children to be smart. We all want our children to value the fact that they're smart. We all want our children to be kind. We want our children to value the fact that they're kind. But if you start to make that their entire value, then what happens is it leads to step number 2. They start to be afraid of appearing untalented, and therefore they avoid challenging. Hold on a second. I'm not sure why the slide is acting up a little bit. Which leads to step 3. Step 3 is they also start to use this in the way that they judge their peers, right? Or themselves among their peers and their peers compared to them, both ways. So first of all, they start to feel inferior to more talented people, right? And let's be honest, as many times as you tell your child they're smart, there's no doubt about it, they're not the smartest person in the world. So they're eventually going to encounter, maybe in their class or maybe as they grow older, right? I'll never forget that we had when we just moved down here on Shlichut, so that was like 7 years ago or 8 years ago when we just moved and joined Chabad of Pasadena, there was a young woman who used to come. At that point, she was finished med school. She was doing a fellowship, and now she's a surgeon in NYU, and we still study Tanya actually every single week. We still study Tanya together. It's quite I didn't think about it, but it is 7 years. And I remember she was sharing that she and her peers had this kind of experience in med school. What happens in med school? You come to med school, and who arrives at med school? Not the slackers. Everybody comes from their college. In their college, there are slackers, there are people that are more athletic, people that are more artistic, etc. And then, of course, there's the people that are more brainy, and they're going to end up being the doctors, right? Then you come to med school, and everybody is from the top 5, 10% of their college. So a lot of people who are used to being in the top 5, 10% are having this reality check where, oh, I'm not the top 5, 10% anymore, right? So if we start to emphasize our child's natural tendency, again, whether it's intelligence, whether it's athletic ability, whatever it is, then when they inevitably encounter somebody else who is more talented than them naturally, just because they're academically, their genes, they're more academically inclined than they are, right? Or more athletically inclined than they are, whatever it is. Then what happens is they start to feel inferior to those people. Why? Because the whole barometer that you've given them to judge with is this compliment that you kept telling them about their natural talent. So what's the natural reaction? The only way to get to gain my self-esteem back is to try to put this other person down. Oh, he's smart, but he's a jerk. Oh, right. So you tell your child constantly over and over and over again, you're pretty, right? I'll just use a girl because that's the typical situation. You're so pretty, you're so pretty, you're so pretty. Then they get to high school, to college. There's another girl who's more pretty than them. So what happens? They start, oh, she's pretty, but she's a jerk. Why? You start, they learn to put other people down because that's the only way they can compete and be the best. Right? They can't make themselves more beautiful. They only are as beautiful as they are. They only are as intelligent as they are. And eventually, and on the flip side, they also look down at those who have less of that same talent. Okay. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to contrast this, and I think some of you picked up on this in the opening exercise, versus instead of praising intelligence, instead of praising a natural talent, what's if instead we praised effort? Right? The same steps follow. But you're going to see that it's all going to work. It's all going to make sense. It's all going to be helpful and healthy for the child to feel. The first step is it empowers the child. What does it motivate? It motivates effort. Why? Because it links effort with worth. You know what your self-worth is based on? Based on how much work you put into your intelligence, not your intelligence level, right? The parent says, I'm so happy that you worked so hard. I'm so proud of you that you worked so hard on your test. The child could have gotten a 30. And they got a 20 last time, or they could have gotten a 30 and gotten a 60 last time. It has nothing to do with the mark. The parent is saying, I am linking your self-worth with the effort you're putting in. Now let's see how that trickles down. Number one, it's going to motivate the child to put in more effort the next time. That's what happened in the study that we just saw. And on the flip side, it's also going to make that the children, the way they interact with the people in their environment, they're going to be unafraid of failure. Because if the barometer is effort, I can always put in more effort. And when they interact with other people around them, they value and respect everybody for the amount of effort that they put in. It doesn't make a difference how pretty they are. It doesn't make a difference how athletic they are. It doesn't make a difference how smart they are. It's about how much effort they put into it. And I think that maybe making some assumptions here, but it's okay. I'll make an assumption about Dr. Dweck that maybe when she went through this study, she was surprised by the results. I think they would have found. And maybe this was surprising to many moms and dads on here or in general in the 21st century, moms and dads who heard about it, they're like, oh, you mean calling my child pretty, just consistently calling my child pretty or smart is not going to do anything? What might have been a surprise for them actually is not a surprise to Jewish literature. It turns out that valuing effort, valuing the process over the result is an integral value when it comes to Judaism. In text 3, we read directly from Pirkei Avot. Miriam, if we can ask you to read for us, please. Ethics of Our Fathers. We're on page 138, text 3.
Okay. What Rabbi Tarfshon would say, it is not incumbent upon you to finish the task, but neither are you free to absolve yourself from it.
Now, the critic might say that this is a great strategy if you're looking for more results, if you're looking to be more productive. Why? Because you want the maximum effort out of somebody. Don't praise the result, praise the effort, then they'll work harder, right? So this is just a practical way to get kids to work harder. But actually, Judaism takes this much deeper. And Miriam, if you can stay with us here, please, read for us text 4 on page 139, a fascinating verse in Job.
Man was created to toil.
Hold on a second. I want you to note, It doesn't say that we were created to produce, to toil. It doesn't make a difference how much you produce. A man was created to work hard. Toil translates as effort, as working hard. That's what toil means. Take a look at text 5. Svetlana, if you can read for us. I think you didn't read yet, right? Or you read the first one, or it's fine. Svetlana, if you can read for us, please. Text 5 is a prayer that the Talmud in Tractate Brachot is discussing. What is a prayer someone should say when they leave the study hall? What is the prayer? Go ahead.
Okay, upon exiting the Beit Midrash, the Torah study hall, what does one say? I thank you, my God, for you have established my lot among those who inhabit the Beit Midrash, and have not established my lot among those who do not study Torah. For both I and they rise early. I rise early to study Torah, and they rise early for matters of relative idleness. Both I and they toil. I toil and receive reward. They toil and do not receive reward.
Okay. This is a beautiful prayer, a beautiful, affirmation, if you will, that we're supposed to say when we finish studying Torah, that we value Torah study, we value connecting to God, and we don't value the idleness of the world. But hold on a second. Could we just re-examine that last line? Rabbi Yisrael Meir Kagan was better known as the Chafetz Chaim, right? Probably most famous for his book on Lashon Hara, on the impact of speaking negatively about other people. But in another book, he talks about this line. He says, hold on a second. Both I and they toil. Jewish people and non-Jewish people, people that are studying Torah, people not studying, we both work hard. I toil and receive reward, and they toil and not receive reward. Look, say what you want about tailors. Say what you want about shoemakers, but they toil, they receive reward. Isn't that true? Don't they work hard and make money? Okay, maybe we don't value that reward. Maybe we value Torah study over. But how could you say they toil and they don't receive reward? So the Chafetz Chaim explains with the following story. He says, imagine you walk into a store and you see a suit for sale. Okay? You walk into a clothing shop, a tailor. You have to put yourself back in the Chafetz Chaim's times, right? So this is 150 years ago. You walk into a tailor. He's got a few suits on the hanger, on the rack, and you see a suit that's for sale with a price tag of $10,000, right? So you think to yourself, this must be made by some world famous Italian tailor. It's got to be the most beautiful suit in the world, right? But it turns out you don't have to be a tailor, a tailoring connoisseur. You start to look at it. The sleeves are mismatched. Everything is baggy. The colors are mismatched. The guy put buttons. He didn't even put the same 4 buttons in a row. So you walk over to the guy. You say to him, hold on a second. I don't understand what's going on here. Why is this suit $10,000? He says, this suit is $10,000 because 1,000 hours was spent on making it. And you pay $10 an hour. The other suit, which actually looks more beautiful, only 10 hours was spent on making it. So therefore, you can get it for $100. That comes out to, right? Whatever it is. In other words, he says to him, the person who made this suit was blind, so it took him much longer to make a suit. The person who made the other suit could see, so it took him much easier to make it, right? Now, I'm sure there are some of us that would look at this and say, "Oh, that's so beautiful. I want to support the blind," but there's no question that would be out of compassion. The better suit is clearly the one that was made by the artist who was able to see that he would see what he was doing, right? Says Rabbi Yisrael, says the Chafetz Chaim, he says, that's what we mean when we say we toil, we receive reward. They toil and they do not receive reward. The physical world, the material world, does not, as a matter of principle, does not reward effort. It rewards results, right? This is why every single factory in the world is trying to figure out how do we spend less man hours and get the same product. Why? Because nobody cares how many man hours went into your product. I'm here right now at a Mac, right? Do I care if the whole thing was done by a machine or if it was done by a human being? No, I don't care. It doesn't make a difference. The product is the same. I'm happy to go and I'll pay the cheapest for the same product. But when it comes to Torah, the Torah values effort. The Torah, this is what we mean when we say we toil and they toil. We receive reward for our toil because Hashem rewards us based on our effort. Yes, if you sit and someone else sits and both of you are sitting in the same room and you're studying Torah and each of you studies for an hour, right? And he covers 50 pages of Talmud and you cover 5 lines of Talmud. Why? Because he happens to have a lot of Talmud learning experience and you have very little, right? So you're both putting in the same amount of effort. It's an hour worth of time of study. You're both, and obviously we're not talking about somebody who's on his phone and distracted and that's why he didn't study. No. 2 people equally. Hashem says, I value these 2 people the same. It's not a numbers game, right? I often tell this to people that I meet in Pasadena when they want to know if my goal is to make them religious. I say, who told you that God has a destination for people? Who told you that being religious is like a destination? No. The way I view it is being religious is a spectrum. And wherever you are, God wants you to grow. So if you never put on tefillin in your life and you put on once to Hashem, that effort is tremendous. And to me, who puts on tefillin every day, my putting on tefillin is not as valuable to God. In other words, Adam le'amal yulad, text 4. A man was created to toil. It's about the effort we put in. And that's something that Judaism has emphasized for ages. When we praise our children in that way, we recognize we praise our children based on effort, not based on results, then the message we send them is they should constantly be asking themselves, what am I capable of doing right now? I'm not the world's smartest person. I'm not the world's whatever. I can't, but what can I do right now? And then let me give that my best shot. What am I capable of? What do my talents have for me? What do my situation have in store for me? And let me give that my best shot. And I think that's one of the most beautiful gifts that we can give our children. The second thing that I want to add about praising our children, so number one is praising effort, not praising natural talents. The second thing we should add is that there are other forms of praise that can motivate and help build our children's self-esteem. The rule of thumb, I think we have to ask ourselves always, whenever we're about to praise our children, is what is the purpose of what I'm about to tell my child? What effect? What am I trying to accomplish by telling my child these words? And we don't often think about that, by the way. We often praise unintentionally. We look at our child and we say, sweetie, you're beautiful, and I love you, and you're so smart, and you can tackle the whole world, etc. And by the way, I'm not saying those are bad things to tell your children. What I'm suggesting is all of those things, tell them to your child right before they go to sleep at night. The context is beautiful. You're there, you're sending them off to sleep with good vibes. They know that they're not taking this as like, I must be the smartest person in the world because before I went to sleep, my mother told me I'm smart. No, they understand that this is your way of expressing your affection for them. Those are all beautiful things to say. But if we're trying to be purposeful, right? If our child comes home with a product, with a project, and we're trying to actually build them into healthy adults, and we want to praise purposefully, then there's other things we need to think about. What is the goal? What is the meta message, right? The subliminal message that I'm sending my child. And when children, right? So here is a list of questions that you might want to ask yourself, right? Now, I recognize that we have these classes and they happen in a vacuum, right? We all got on the Zoom, we're all here, and we're going to sit and we're going to discuss what's the best way to praise our child. But then your child comes home from school with homework, and you have about a grand total of like 0.2 seconds to praise. So none of this, there's going to be some exercises at the end of the lesson to help with this. None of this is really about technique. All of this is about technique. None of this is about, how do we stick to the technique? There's an exercise for that at the end of today's lesson, which is how can we get better at sticking to that technique? Nobody expects you to say to your child, you just brought home a paper with an A on it or with a C on it. Pause. I just got to go watch Rabbi Zushi's lesson for 90 minutes for a minute, and then I'll come back and I'll give you the right type of praise, right? This is a slow process where we get better at it. But if you were able to slow that moment down into 90 minutes, here's what we really want to be asking ourselves. Question number one, what long-term effect will my words have? What is the message that I'm sending? Right? Am I sending a message of you're amazing no matter what you do? Or am I sending, meaning, in other words, you're smart even if you don't prove it? Or am I sending a message of I'm proud of the effort that you put into this? What am I trying to accomplish? What are the subliminal messages that my child is picking up? And then finally, the last thing I want to end off with is the importance of praising honestly. This is the hardest thing to do because most of us are not so good about honesty as a whole. We're honest in our business dealings. We don't steal from other people. We don't lie about, about something you gave your word for, etc. Right? But then when we sit around the table, we say to ourselves, lying to my child and telling them that they're smart, what could be wrong with that? That's all good. That's nice white lies, makes people feel good, right? Lying to my wife and telling her she's not fat, that only can be good, right? Nothing can be wrong with that. It turns out that when it comes to praising our children, there's a lot to lose by not praising honestly. And this might be the most important thing, even though we're going to say it fairly quickly. Praising honestly is extremely important. Matt or Beth Shebby, does one of you want to read for us? Text 6 is from Rabbi Abraham J. Twersky. By the way, one of you might, you guys might have noticed that this is a book that's been quoted very often in this course. The first time I was introduced to this book, I read it, and I've never stopped reading it since. This book that we're quoting now, which we're going to quote 2 or 3 quotes today in this lesson, and in almost every lesson we've quoted it. It's an amazing book. It's called Positive Parenting. I think I linked it in the first email for a follow-up email for this course. If you don't have it yet, I really recommend buying it. I'm not suggesting you read it right now cover to cover, but I am suggesting that have it on your nightstand, make a time once a week, once a day to read it for 5 minutes. He has some very powerful messages, and reading it and using that in implementing your parenting is very powerful. Anyways, let's see what he has to say in text 6. Matt or Beth, one of the Chevys?
I want to say I met him once at Pittsburgh Hillel.
Ah, beautiful. More than I can say. I never met him.
All right. When my grandchild was 7, he began taking violin lessons, and after his 4th lesson, he wanted to audition for me. Needless to say, his performance was a bit less than that of a virtuoso, but I was able to recognize the melody, even with all the sharps and flats that were uncalled for. My first impulse was to compliment him. That was beautiful. But I caught myself in time realizing that this would be a lie because it was not beautiful. Instead, I said, I know that tune. Play it again and I'll sing it along with you. We did so twice, and we had a duet which pleased him to no end, as his facial expressions revealed. I'd complimented him on his performance without lying to him.
I think this is such a beautiful moment, because I think most of us would have been guilty of the child took 4 lessons, they invested effort. I'll throw them a compliment. What does it cost me to throw them a compliment and say the song you just played was beautiful? Okay, but let's talk about what happens when we praise a child untruthfully, dishonestly. Number one, instead of boosting the child's self-esteem, which is what we're looking for, it can actually harm it. Okay, think about what the child will say to themselves. I'm so stupid that the only way to compliment me is by making up good stuff about me. I'm so incompetent at playing the violin. And by the way, this happens to us. Sometimes our children catch us on it, right? Because they bring something home and they actually know that it's ridiculous. They know that it's not beautiful. And you say, wow, you drew this at school. It's so beautiful. And they're like, no, I was showing this to you because I want to show you how ridiculous it is. And I have this one actually, which I think is beautiful. So first of all, and sometimes they say that to you and sometimes they don't. Sometimes in their head, they just internalize, oh, I see. My parent doesn't really praise me truthfully. They don't really think this is beautiful. They're just saying that because I must be such a failure that they need to hand me out free compliments, right? Which is actually extremely damaging to a child's self-esteem. The other things that are wrong with not being honest in our praise is that you start to lose your track record, right? You're the boy who cried wolf, right? You told the child once the painting was beautiful. Okay, maybe one time they believed you. The second time they didn't believe you because they knew the painting wasn't beautiful. The third, eventually they're like, even if I bring up the most beautiful painting in the world, my mom says it's beautiful. I don't believe her. I need somebody else to tell it to me, right? I need to look for my praise elsewhere. So the efficacy goes down. The last reason, maybe the most obvious, is we're modeling horrible behavior for our children. We're teaching them that it's okay to lie. And I know some of you are thinking, oh, yeah, we're teaching them it's okay to lie to make other people feel good. But is that something we want to impart to our children? I would say no. We want our children to be honest, and honest as honest can be. Now, honest doesn't mean we need to be brutally honest. As I think Rabbi Dr. Twersky points out in text 6, you don't need to tell somebody, well, actually, this is horrible. You played violin and it was horrible. I was able to recognize the tune, but that's it. No, you can do so in a loving and caring way. You can say, wow, I recognize the tune. Let's sing it together. Mary had a little lamb, and go through the whole experience with them. In this way, showing them that you're there with them in the effort and they're growing. And then when the time comes that they come home and it actually is beautiful, you know what? You are allowed to say it's beautiful. And maybe even more than saying it's beautiful, what you can say is, wow, you've grown so much. I remember the first time that you came to play me Mary Had a Little Lamb, and it wasn't even that beautiful, but I was able to tell the tune. And now you can play it and it's beautiful, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Right? So in other words, we can find ways to praise our children, creative ways, and it might not always in the moment be the easiest thing to do, to praise our children honestly, in addition to all the other things we mentioned. And in this way, we and still make them feel good about themselves without saying something that's untrue. By the way, just to add one more tip in that regard, because it's hard sometimes, right? You want to be honest, truthful, but you also want to make them feel good about what they accomplished, right? The best thing usually to do is, like he did with the violin, point out facts. So your 3-year-old comes home and they drew a nice scene. You say, oh, wow, that's a sun. I can see that's a sun. And you drew a tree with flowers, etc. Your tone of voice is giving all the feel good that they need. Trust me. They don't need you to say, wow, this can hang next to Rembrandt and Michelangelo. They don't need you to say that. Okay, and it's simply not true. All right, so now I think we're ready to revisit the learning exercise we opened up with, and I think you guys are all beginning to see where we went. So let's see how many of them will pass the litmus test of being positive or negative or neutral praise and why they are so. The first compliment was, you're so smart, I'm very proud, right? Definitely has a negative impact on overall and long-term self-esteem, right? You're telling the child they're smart, which is just praising a natural talent that they have, right? Even if your child gives you a massive smile, probably not a good idea. Okay. What about number two? You're an absolute angel, the best. Negative. This doesn't pass the honesty test. First of all, they're not an absolute angel, and they most certainly are not the best in the whole world, right? Find other ways to say it to make them to make them feel that it's truthful and you're actually giving them a compliment that speaks to them. Okay, what about number three? You did a great job. Just look at how perfect the work is. First of all, on our first count, you're praising the result. You're not praising the effort they put in, right? Even if we just talk about what they're talking about, let's say they got 100 on a math test, and you say you did a great job, just look how perfect the work is, you're sending the message, you're only perfect if you get hundreds on your math tests. We're not looking to do that. What we can say is, number three, you worked really hard, that is wonderful. That's amazing. Why is that amazing? It's amazing because it passes on all of the marks that we mentioned till now. Let's summarize them, because this is the halfway point of the lesson, and we're concluding now our Jewish insights into praising and rewarding, and then we're going to move on to punishment and reprimand. So let's summarize. Tips and guidelines for praising children. Number one, praise the effort, not the result. Number two, praise with purpose. What do I intend to have out of this? Oh, I'm praising their work because I want them to work harder, et cetera, et cetera. Number three, praise good behavior. Show your child what behavior you value, and then they will value that behavior as well, right? And at the risk of jumping into really choppy water here, on very thin ice, let me share with kindness. Okay, with kindness, all of us want our children to be kind, right? But I think, and I might be wrong with this, but correct me if you think I'm wrong here. You see a child doing something kind to another child, don't say to them, you're the kindest boy I know, you shared your toy with somebody else. Why? Trust me, there will come a moment when they don't feel so kind, and you will still say to them, you're kind, or they'll say, that I didn't even think that was kindness. That was just obvious. You're praising, you're telling them something that's like, it's not even, there's no purpose in that. What's the purpose in them? I guess the purpose would be for them to view themselves as a kind person. But you can do just as much by telling them the following. Wow, I saw you shared that toy. That's a very hard thing to do. That was such a kind act. I love when you're so kind. That's it. That's it. Pretty simple. We're praising the action, not the. In that instance, we're praising the action, not the title. And lastly, of course, praise honestly. Let's not lie to our children just because we want to praise them. Okay. We'll pause now for questions. Does anybody have any questions before we move on to punishment and reprimanding? Nobody's even going to praise me in the comments? Okay, all right, fine. I had to say that. Okay.
I'm practicing on my cat.
You're practicing on your cat. You're talking to your cat. All right. Thank you very much. Okay. Moving on to the second half of the lesson, punishment and reprimand. Okay, so once again, let's start off with an exercise, right? Why? Because this will help us be able to revisit later. So the question on the table is, your 9-year-old daughter has been acting rudely to her younger brother for the past hour. Now she slammed the door in his face and barked some nasty comments at him. What should your response be? Okay? I'm not going to have too much time for this, but if you want to write it down on the paper, on page 1, in the textbook, on page 141, it'll serve you well later on because you'll be able to revisit it. As we have seen at the beginning of today's lesson, parents are very hesitant to discipline or enforce negative consequences on their children. Why? Because the big worry is self-esteem. You're going to make them feel like garbage, right? So, question on the table that we need to ask ourselves before we move forward is, what message does a child Hold on. What message does a child get when he or she misbehaves and you do not express your disappointment or give a consequence? We're on page 142 here. Does anybody want to suggest something? Anybody want to unmute? Let's get some crowd involvement here. What do you guys think? What message are we sending when our child doesn't? Your child hits their sibling, and you say absolutely nothing. What message are we sending our child then? What message do they get?
Silence is consent.
So, in other words, that you agree that you think this is a good thing that they did, or it's not a problem.
Correct.
Okay? Anybody else? Anything else?
They don't care about their behavior.
I love that. Good. This may sound very similar to a match just here, but I want to take a moment to differentiate. Why? Because this is what we've been talking about. Since lesson one, we've been saying we have to parent with our children's best interest at heart, right? So I think what Matt said might be a little extreme, although sometimes children do get that impression. Oh, my parent didn't tell me not to hit my sibling, so therefore it must be that they're okay with it, right? But if we've told them even once in their lifetime that it's not okay to hit, and there's a good chance that even if you're the most horrible parent in the world, you probably told your child at one point that it's not okay to hit, they're not taking your silence as consent, Matt. So if so, then we move on to step two, which is even worse. What Susie is saying is the message we're sending our child is, my parent knows it's not okay to hit. My parents saw me hitting. They don't care about me, and therefore they don't want to tell me off for hitting my brother. So think about what's going on here. We're talking to a child. We're thinking to ourselves, oh, we're going to be deflating their ego. We're going to be deflating their self-esteem by punishing them because I'm going to be telling them something that they don't want to hear. But think about what we're doing to them on the flip side. What we're telling the subliminal message we're sending them is, I don't care about you enough to tell you off. Maybe even worse. I think that if I tell you off, it's not even going to help. I've given up on you, right? The best case scenario that they would think about you is you chose to overlook it because you don't want to make a big deal out of it. And even that is not such a great look for you as a parent, right? Because it doesn't speak well to caring. So I think the message that I'm trying to send, especially with the point that Susie made, is that negative consequences, punishment, reprimanding, whatever it is that you choose, done properly, and we'll soon learn about the unhealthy ways because it's important to talk about unhealthy punishment, but done properly can actually have the opposite effect. It can show our children that we care about them. I love you, therefore I need to put you in a timeout in your room, or whatever it is that you choose, right, for 5 minutes because you hit your sister, because I love you and I don't want you to grow up as a child that hits, right? So in other words, it comes from the right place. Now, I'm not saying timeout is the right way to go about it. I know that different parents have different methods for that, and that's fine. This idea that actually disciplining is a form of love is reflected in our sometimes very painful relationship with God. By us, I mean the Jewish people. Avshin, do you have your textbook with you?
No.
You don't. Okay. So Sarah or Zach, does one of you want to read for us text 7? This is from the prophet Amos.
Yeah, I'll read. Only you did I love above all the families of the earth. Therefore I visit upon you the consequences of all your iniquities.
Hashem says to the Jewish people, yes, you've been complaining that you are the most afflicted people among all the peoples on the earth. The Jewish people have suffered more than anybody else has suffered. Hashem says it's because I love you. I love you, and therefore I punish you. You know that quote, I think it's Tevye. Somebody in Fiddler on the Roof. I think it's Tevye. He says, I know it's because we're the chosen people. Couldn't you choose somebody else every once in a while? Right? He says something like, I don't remember, I'm butchering the line, but it's something like that. In other words, when we punish our children, the first and most important thing we have to recognize is we are punishing out of love. We're telling them off out of love. Let's go back to Rabbi Abraham J. Twersky, text 8. Sarah, if you can continue for us, please. Or maybe Zach, if he's there. I don't know.
Yeah. No, Zach's
okay.
Many of the interactions that can affect self-esteem are not dramatic or traumatic events, but rather things to which we ascribe little significance. For example, the child asks you something while you are absorbed reading an article, and with your eyes on the paper, or at best halfway on the paper, you respond to the child's question, yeah, I guess it's okay. No big deal, is it? But think about it a moment. A child's question, perhaps whether he may go over to a friend's house, may be trivial to you, but it is important to him. Suppose you wanted to ask your employer something that was of importance to you, and he gave your question scant attention, mumbling some kind of answer while he was absorbed doing something else. How would you feel? Would that give you the feeling that your employer is really concerned about you and your cares? That is how the child feels when you act similarly. You are not required to put the paper or the magazine aside, but you might say, "Honey, I'm in the middle of reading this and I want to hear what you have to say. I'll be through with it in just a few moments, and then I can listen to you." When you finish the article or come to a break, you can then listen to his question attentively and perhaps even ask what he plans to do at the friend's house. The child should have reason to feel that his needs are considered important. Do you know the names of all your child's teachers? These people are very important to him. They are his authorities. In addition to knowing their names, you should care about how the child feels about his teachers. Also, you should know the names of at least his closest friends. It is a sign of his significance to you when you show concern about the people with whom he associates.
This is such a powerful text. I love it. Why? Because it speaks to exactly what we're saying. We have to adopt before we give our first punishment. Before we give our first word off to our child, the first and foremost thing in our head has to be, and we've been talking about this since lesson 1, but I think text 8 really speaks to it. We have to have care for our child, right? We should always have care front and center for our child, but especially when we're about to do something that can be misconstrued as not caring for them, we have to be very careful that the only feeling in our heart is care, love. All I want is I care for you and I love you, and that's actually why it's also motivating why I'm doing this thing to you that might not seem, at least at face value, like something loving. Discipline, when done correctly, shows the child that you love and you care about them. Now, so the $1 million question is, so what do you do? Do you do a 5-minute timeout? Do you slap your children silly like they used to do a couple hundred years ago, right? What are you doing for discipline? And the answer is, it doesn't make a difference. Whatever you're going to do, if it's guided by love, then it will be the right thing to do, right? If it's guided by a strong sense of closeness to your child, then that will come across in it. Think about it. We've all seen exercises. I can't think of any of them off the top of my head, right? Where you say the same phrase, say it 2 times, and one time it sounds like sarcastic, and one time it sounds loving, right? Why? Because it depends what you're feeling as you're saying it to the child, right? And I think that's what the Rebbe is saying in text 9, which is the Rebbe on education. Svetlana, I think we're going back to you. We're page 144, text 9.
All right. Education needs to be implemented with love and affection. We see quite plainly that education that flows from revealed love is more effective and successful than education that is imposed through fear and trepidation. In general, it is advisable to cause a child, it's inadvisable to cause a child anxiety, for this inhibits his or her ability to live a life of tranquility, serenity, and joy, all necessary ingredients to maximize one's potential.
This notion that we're driving home now, which is that any effective rebuke, any effective telling off a child has to flow from a revealed love. It can't be like, oh, I love you. Like, yeah, if you were, I don't know, if right now some terrorists were holding you, I would give my life for you. Right? No. That we all have that love. That's always there. It's very deep. It's very. No. We're talking about revealed love. The fact that when you're telling the child off, it has to flow from revealed love, right? That notion is reflected in a very interesting irony in the Torah. The Medrash points out that you will not find a single time that Moses well, you find it sometimes, but much more you find that Moses rebukes the Jewish people than that he's blessing them. And on the flip side, the most blessings for the Jewish people in the Torah, right, come from a man named Bilam, who was a non-Jewish prophet. Why is that? The Medrash explains. Susie, can you read for us, please? Text 10, we're on page 144.
It would have been proper for the reprimands to emanate from the mouth of Balaam and the blessings from the mouth of Moses. However, Balaam rebuked, the Jews would have dismissed his words and said, "Our enemy is rebuking us." Had Moses blessed the Jews, the nations of the world would have dismissed the blessings and said, He who loves them has blessed them. God therefore said, let Moses who loves them rebuke them, and let Balaam who detests them bless them.
I think there's something very powerful about that statement. Obviously, blessing when it comes from somebody. I'm sorry, obviously rebuke. Let's talk mainly about the rebuke. Obviously, rebuke when it comes from somebody who we feel loves us. In that moment, we feel that love oozing forth, and that's why they're telling us off. It doesn't feel like rebuke. It feels like you yourself rebuking yourself, right? We tell ourselves off all the time. That what I just did wasn't a good thing, and I'm not going to do it again, right? We have those kind of conversations with ourselves all the time, and we don't feel like we hate ourselves, right? At least in a healthy manner. Every once in a while, maybe we slip into a bad state of mind that we do think we hate ourselves, right? But certainly in a healthy state of mind, it's good. It's me correcting myself, right? The same thing if somebody else, if somebody's correcting us, if somebody is reprimanding us, if somebody is punishing us, if somebody is telling us off, but they're doing so coming from a place of revealed love, then it can work wonders with the child. Okay, so that is our guiding principle. Whatever you're going to do to your child has to come from a place of love. Okay, but how do we apply that practically? Give me some rules. Give me a framework. So the truth is, there's 1.5 million rules that we can give. There really are. But in this lesson, we're going to focus on 3 things. 3 things that are all going to be, let's call it symptoms of the fact that, well, not symptoms, they're going to be guideposts, ways to help us make sure that we're reprimanding, we're rebuking, we're disciplining out of love and care for the child and not, heaven forbid, from anything else. And number 1, we've all heard it 1,000,000 times, is don't react in the moment. Don't react emotionally. Your child just hit their sibling. And that irks every parent to no end. And all you want to do is right now lay down the rule, etc., 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 right? But hold on a second. Let's pause for a second. The child is not in a good, healthy, emotional state right now. There's no way that whatever lesson you're trying, even if you were perfect parenting in that moment, and you weren't, there's no way that you're actually going to have an effect on them when they're emotionally charged. Now let's talk about you. There's a good chance that whatever is going wrong has affected you emotionally. So you're not going to be able to parent effectively. You're probably not going to remember, right? You're not going to remember all the rules. You can't just pause and say, let me go listen to a 90-minute class on organization and continue. So the best thing to do is to say, I'm not going to react to this now because I'm angry. Now, if there's something that needs to be done in the moment, obviously we do it in the moment. If one of the children is hitting the other child, you separate them because there's a safety issue here, right? If the child is touching the hot stove and that's why you're upset at them because you were scared and that led to anger, etc., no problem. Right now, in the moment, you can react only in order to remedy the situation. But in terms of the parenting lesson, the lesson that you want to teach your children, it's always best to wait until you calm down. There is a book that's called I Believe. It's by Label Zisman, in which he tells his memories as a child, etc. His father was a chassid, etc. Anyways, and he speaks very, very greatly about his father. And I'm going to quote you from this book now. I have it here. And I think this story really illustrates this idea that there's nothing wrong with sometimes waiting until to give the actual lesson or the actual punishment or consequence or disciplinary moment. Now, I have to give a disclaimer. This is a story from over 100 years ago. There is spanking involved, and I'm not really talking about the spanking. The spanking, maybe it worked then, maybe it didn't. That's a whole different conversation we can have. I think the way he spanked is very, very important. Okay, so let's talk about that. I'm going to quote you directly from the book. Okay, he lived in pre-war Kovna. For those of you that are familiar, like the Kovna ghetto, right? So this is before the war. Only once in my life did he spank me. On this occasion, I got it into my gingy head of mine to break all the windows on Vilna Gas. This was a street of shops, and all the shops had small basement windows on the level of my shoe. I kicked one, and it broke. The tinkling glass made a nice sound. So I proceeded like this right on down the street. Naturally, there was an uproar, and my father was informed that a red-headed boy, there was only one who fit that description, had broken all the windows. I well remember how angry he was, which was a rare sight. I knew by then that my father was a good and patient man, but you better not cross him. He was fierce when he was angry. On this occasion, he said to me, I am not going to punish you now because I am too angry. And the Torah teaches that we should never rebuke anyone in anger. But I want you to know that you should never in your life hurt another person or that person's property. Never. That was it. 2 days later, he called me again and he said, now I am no longer angry at you. so I will punish you. I love you and I don't want to punish you, but you must be punished for what you did. And then he spanked me. I think there's something so powerful about this story. I mean, the presence of mind to be able, while he's fuming mad at it, could you imagine the amount of things going through the father's head? He embarrassed me. He did something terrible. There's property damage. He's going to have to pay for it. There's all these people that are fuming mad at him, the whole city, everything all together. Never mind the child who has, like, that's the last thing on his mind is what's the proper lesson for the child, right? And he recognized that. That's what I think is the most important thing. He recognized in the moment that this is not the moment to react. And I think that's lesson number one. Why? Because remember, the point is to discipline our children out of love. We can't do that if right now what we're feeling is anger. You're allowed to get angry as a mom. You're allowed to get angry as a dad. You're just not allowed to actually discipline your children out of that anger, because then it's not going to come across in a loving and caring way. And by the way, it becomes a more powerful lesson to your child. We get angry sometimes. We have to work on controlling our anger. But people get angry sometimes. But that's not the moment to be making calculated decisions about how to educate our children or any relationship for that matter. Okay. Yeah, we did this already. Here we go. Okay. So number two, the second application of this that we're going to present in this lesson is to respect your children. And in order to really drive home this lesson, I'd like to start off with this video. This is a video of Rabbi Shmuel Lu. Rabbi Shmuel Lu was a dean. They call it a headmaster, right? In London, he was the headmaster in a school in London. Take a look at the following story and how he interacts with the Rebbe in this interview.
Rabbi Shmuel Lu is a veteran shliach and educator.
Sometimes I would lose my temper with my kids and things like that, even hit them or sometimes, God forbid. And but I did, and I felt terrible about it, because I mean, the main thing was, thank God, a very beautiful, warm relationship with all of them. And I felt very bad. And I went to Yechidus. This was Isru Chag Shavuos Tavshin Lamed Gimel, 1973, the day after Shavuos. It was a Friday afternoon. By the way, when the Rebbe had Yechidus after a Farbrengen, if the Farbrengen was on a Thursday night, the Yechidus with the guests was on Friday afternoon, if it was in the summer, from Shavuos or Yud Beis Tammuz, and on a Motzi Shabbos if it was in the winter, like Yotes Kislev. In later years, the Rebbe would go to the oil the day after Farbrengen. Now, I went into Yechidus with my sons, and I wrote into the Rebbe that I'm very concerned about my own weakness of losing my temper, and even sometimes striking them. And I feel it's bad in its own right and bad for what the effect it could have. The Rebbe told me a point which is very profound in chinuch generally, which is how you look at your child, or how you look at your talmidim. The Rebbe said one of the things to think into, which is generally the way of Chabad, is way of hisbonenus, that every problem has a solution, and that solution comes about through cultivating the appropriate hisbonenus. He said one of the hisbonenus, he didn't say that, that's my understanding. What the Rebbe actually said was, one of the hisbonenus is to think into, as much as they're your children, even more so they are God's children. It says, Bonim atem l'Hashem Elokechem, you are children of Hashem your God. And you would not strike the children of a fellow human being. How much more so the Eibishter's children, says, Schlagen dem Eibishter sein Kind, darf sich atreiselt on the hand. Your hand should tremble before it hits Hashem's child. Then he said that sometimes it's necessary, lahatil ema, in order to promote discipline, but kemon lish mitoich kas, never out of anger.
I think there's something so beautiful about thinking about your children as if they're somebody else's children. We never do this. Like you would never, no, none of us would be caught dead hitting another parent's child, talking down to another parent's child, right? None of the things that we do to our own. Now, so we wouldn't do that to somebody else's child. When it comes to our children, we say, oh, it's okay. I can talk to them, not in the most respectful manner, right? It turns out it's actually the exact opposite. And this is where, obviously, so why do we feel that way? We feel that way because there is an iota of ego involved. There is an iota of the feeling of, oh, these are my children. I own them, therefore I could talk to them that way. I wouldn't talk to somebody else's children because they're not my children. But to my children, I could talk that way. No, heaven forbid. And this is where this perspective of recognizing, we did this exercise back in lesson 1, right? Why do we have children? We have to recognize that our children that we brought into this world are a gift. They're not a gift. What was the story with Beruria, the wife of Rabbi Meir, right? When they lost their children. And she reminded him that it's like an object that somebody gave you for safekeeping. This is not your child. This is a beautiful, holy child that Hashem gave you, a precious neshama. And it's not your child to hit. It's not your child to talk down to. It's not your child to disrespect. So what happens now? Now we end up with a different set of rules. What's the set of rules that we end up with? What is the message that I'm sending my children as I'm talking to them? To shame them, to humiliate them, to make them feel less than, to say, for example, a line that pops out of trust me, it pops out of every one of our mouths every once in a while, and it's a horrible line. What's wrong with you? Why would you do that? Right? Every parent, every once in a while, because honestly, sometimes it goes through our mind. We're like, what on earth are you doing? Right? But that line, think about the connotation of that line. What's wrong with you? What are we trying to send a subliminal message to our child that you have something in you that you have to be ashamed of? Of course we don't do that. We don't discipline a child out of anger, right? We don't say angry things to them, etc. So this is guidepost number 2 is to respect our children. And guidepost number 3 is to talk up to our children. And I think this is a very interesting one. This is very it's not. Wow, I skipped all the texts. We were supposed to read some texts here. Let's do them quickly, like that. At least we did the texts we were supposed to read. But it's the same point that we're talking about here. We're going to start with Rabbi Abraham J. Twersky. Sarah, if we can ask you to read for us, please. Text 11, page 145.
Yeah. While there are few rules that are without any exceptions, here is one that is absolute. Never, but never humiliate a child. Discipline does not require his being shamed. A child should not be humiliated in the presence of his friends or even his own sisters or brothers. When reprimand or punishment is necessary, call the child aside and in privacy carry out the required discipline. Although the child may resent the reprimand, he will appreciate your concern for his self-respect. On the other hand, if you reprimand him in the presence of others, the pain of being humiliated may be so intense that it obscures the message of the reprimand, and the discipline is of little value.
I actually want to say something, even though this is the point we spoke about earlier about humiliating your child or shaming your child. I want to say one more thing about this. One thing that works for me is that in my head, I say to myself, let's remember who's on whose side, right? Why? Because what happens is when we're reprimanding a child, especially if it's done out of anger, which we spoke about already, we're going to reemphasize in a moment in text 12 that that's obviously wrong. But very often what tends to happen is it becomes an us versus them, right? Is anybody familiar with the concept of a battle of wills, right? You keep saying this, we need to do. The child keeps saying that I'm not going to do this. I'm going to deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper, right? In other words, there's this unspoken side taking, right? That nobody's even saying, but it becomes very clear in the room. I'm on one side, my child is on the other side, and it's me versus my child. My child wants to do this terrible thing or doesn't want to do whatever they need to do now, and I want them to do it or I don't want them to do it, etc. And it's like me versus you. One of the things I like to do is just a little brain hack that I like to do in my head is I like to remind myself in my head that it's actually me and my child versus their Yetzer Hara. In other words, does my child do negative things? Sure. My child has certain negative sides to them that does negative things. but it's me and my child working together as a team against their negative impulse, or against their impulse control, or whatever age and stage of parenting you're holding. In other words, what changes here is that all of a sudden, what's it going to help me to humiliate the child? The child is not the person I'm upset at here. I'm upset at their Yetzer Hara. So together, let's get upset at the Yetzer Hara, right? That's when lines like this come out of our mouths. I'm not going to let you do that. You're better than that, right? This is what we mean. And this is the next point we're getting to, which is speaking up to a child. Okay, but let's read text 12 before we get to point number 3. Miriam, if you can read for us, please. Text 12. This is for the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe. I don't know that it's available in English.
Could someone else read this time, please?
Sure, absolutely. So let me ask Susie, if you can. Matt, if you can, please. Text 12. By the way, this is a quote from. Come again?
No, go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say this is a quote from a little pamphlet that the previous Rebbe put together, which is called Principles of Education and Guidance. I don't know that it's translated into English in its completion. I think they translated this quote just for this lesson. I wish I could link it because it's got so many interesting insights. Anyways, go ahead.
An educator or counselor must understand that not only is it important to appropriately phrase his or her words, but that the manner in which the words are expressed, with politeness and patience or with agitation and derision, profoundly impacts the effectiveness of the educational message. Many educators and counselors err in this area. They imagine that their emotional outbursts that are accompanied by much commotion and shouting help them achieve their educational goals. Some assault their students with angry and harsh words and berate and insult them. In truth, however, even if the pupil is temporarily upset by the fiery words of the educator and counselor and his or her heart contracts from pain, even if the pupil cries bitter tears, this type of education yields no lasting benefit whatsoever. Any temporarily positive effect will vanish like a fleeting dream.
So, in step 2, what we've been talking about, or in the second application tip that we've been talking about the need to respect our children as we speak to them, right? So the last thing we spoke about was not humiliating our children. And now he's saying that's not just about the words we use. It's not just about not telling them things like what's wrong with you or things like that, or making it an us versus them. There's another aspect of this, which is the tone of voice, right? The style in which you're talking to them. Why? Because if it's coming from a place of love, then the way those words are coming out the tone of voice is going to be very, very different. Screaming, for example, right? Never helps. I know we all do it. But it never helps. Why? Because the message that it sends to the child is, I'm not in control. You're getting under my skin, and that's why I'm reacting in this way. That's not helpful. Okay. And now we get to point number 3, or practical tip number 3, and that is speaking up to our children. One of the things that we owe our children, many of the things that we owe our children is often phrased in the following statement: we have to be the parent in the room, right? Okay. Now, we usually use that phrase when we're talking about, the child wants to use a knife to cut vegetables and they're 2 years old, they're going to cut their finger off. It's up to us to be the parent in the room, right? What we don't often think about is we have to be the adult in the room who actually realizes the child's potential beyond what the child realizes. We have to believe in our children more than they believe in themselves. Susie, if you can read for us, please, text 13 from the Rebbe about this powerful mind shift. That when we talk to our children, we have to be talking to them as if they're greater than what they are now, believing in them more than they believe in themselves.
I would like to add one more point, which is also emphasized in the teaching of Hasidus, namely to be careful that in admonishing children, the teacher or parent should not evoke a sense of helplessness or despondency on the part of the child. In other words, the child should not get the impression that he is good for nothing and that all is lost, etc. And therefore he can continue to do as he wishes. On the contrary, the child should always be encouraged in the feelings that he is capable of overcoming his difficulties, and that it is only a matter of will and determination.
And this speaks to the same point that I was talking about earlier about the us versus them mentality, or the us and them versus the bad side of them, versus the impulsive side of them, their call it your Yetzer Hara or your evil inclination or whatever word you have for it. Why? Because now what's happening is we're saying, me, I'm on your team. I believe in you more even than you believe in yourself, more than you realize. You're a child. You don't even realize the potential you have. So together, let's overcome this, because you don't realize that once you overcome this, you're speeding like you've got greater potential than you can ever imagine. And there's a beautiful vart on this from the Shalah Hakadosh, which is Rabbi Yeshayahu Alevi Horowitz. It's going to be text 14b, and he says this idea on text 14a, which is from Proverbs. Tarlan, do you have the text in front of you? I think before she was driving. I'm not sure if she's still driving. Looks like still not. Okay. Miriam, are you available to read now? Trying to give other people that haven't been reading a chance. But I recognize that a lot of people are multitasking.
No, not right now. Thank you.
Still not. Okay, that's okay. So then let's go back to Beth, if you can, please, for us. Text 14a, and then right away text 14b, which is Rabbi Yeshayahu Alevi Horowitz's explanation of that statement. Go ahead.
Reprove not a scoffer lest he hate you. Reprove a wise man and he will love you.
So in text 14, the Shalah is going to explain to us that actually both of these statements are talking about the same person. Go ahead.
When you reprove your fellow, do not tell him how awful he is, for he will despise you and not heed your words. This is the meaning of the verse, reprove not a scoffer. Do not reprove him with dismissiveness. Do not label him a scoffer. To the contrary, tell him that he is unbefitting for a wise person, such as he, to behave in such a manner. Reprove a wise man, that is, consider him a wise person, and he will heed your words and accept the reproof.
I mean, this is similar to what I was saying earlier about the us versus them mentality. In other words, how are you looking at your child? Are you looking at your child, even if you don't say it, even if you're very good, very good at hiding your words and your emotions, you don't say it, but in your head you're thinking, my child is right now is bad. If you are punishing a bad child, it will not work. He's going to hate you. Why? Not because of the punishment, because of the fact that you're looking at him as a bad child. So when you punish a bad child, says this verse from Proverbs, when you punish a bad child, the bad child will hate you. But if, and this is the same situation, just looked at through a different lens, but if what you're doing is reproving a wise child, a good child, if you're punishing a good child, that will always work. Punishing a good child always works. Why? Because you're recognizing the potential that there is in the child. You're just punishing them because out of love, in order for them to grow, you need to tell them off in whatever particular element is happening right now. I think that speaks to this idea of speaking up to a child. Trusting our children that they can overcome any obstacle that's put in their way. And as we know, when we trust them, they begin to trust themselves. And then recognizing their potential and their innate goodness and referring to anything bad that they're doing, not as defining who they are, but the bad thing that they're doing, the misbehavior, is actually in the context of the child's greatness. It's me and you against your negative tendency. You're amazing, and I'm going to help you be amazing. You are inherently good. You are a good person. You're a competent child. You have an essential goodness and an incredible potential. And we're going to overcome it together by working together against that. And that might involve a punishment or me telling you off, etc. I recognize that a lot of these things you're like, oh, I don't see myself practically doing that. Like my child just threw something on the floor. I'm not starting to talk to them about their inherent greatness. But as an attitude, and slowly shifting, and we're soon going to talk about some tips for adopting this attitude. As an attitude, it's extremely, extremely beneficial, and it starts to seep into the words we say, and the attitudes with which we say them, etc. Okay, so let's summarize what we've learned today about the rules of how to lovingly and caringly discipline or tell off our children. Number one, do not react in the moment. Nobody gains from emotional reaction. That emotional reaction can be used just to make sure that they're safe. Just to make sure that whatever the issue is not happening. The lesson, the discipline can happen later. Number two, respect your children. Don't talk down to them. Don't humiliate them. Don't look at them as less than. And number three, speak up to your children, which perhaps is the opposite of step two. In other words, recognize their innate potential and their innate goodness, and recognize that it's you and them together against whatever negative tendency it is that we're fighting right now. Okay. I think right about now, we are ready to revisit the exercise. The laptop almost just fell down. Hold on. Everybody bear with me. Okay, I think right about now, we are ready to revisit our exercise 2, which was on page 141. I don't know how many of you filled it out, but if you did, now would be a good time to go back and see how would the response that you gave be modified based on these 3 rules. That you can view them through the lesson of these 3 rules and see how much you had actually applied them and not, and how much you've grown based on what we've learned today. Okay. Our sages tell us, and I want to conclude with this story, and then we're going to talk about some exercises for the week. Our sages tell us that our 3 patriarchs had a very different relationship with their children. You can see this actually. Abraham, the first of our patriarchs, Abraham, had 2 children, Yaakov, but there was also Yitzchak, Isaac, but there was also Ishmael. The second of our patriarchs, Yitzchak, Isaac, had 2 children. There was Yaakov, but he also had Esav. The only one he had 12 children actually, and every single one of them was amazing, was Yaakov. Svetlana, if you can read for us, please, text 15, about Jacob's relationship with his children. We're on page 150.
Yes. Jacob wished to reveal to his sons the end of days, but the divine presence departed from upon him. Perhaps, Jacob said, the divine presence has departed because one of my children is unworthy. Perhaps I am like Abraham, who begat Ishmael, and like my father Isaac, who begat Esau. Jacob's children responded, Hear, O our father Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. Just as there is only one God in your heart, there is only one in our hearts.
And as you may or may have not picked up, that is the origin of the statement, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. It's literally, obviously, when we say it, we're talking about Israel, the Jewish people, right? That the Jewish people should know God, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. But when in the original story, it was Jacob's children telling it to their father. How is it that Jacob managed to have 12 children, and every single one of them stayed true to believing in God, etc.? How do we maintain a balanced approach to raising children that are well balanced? It turns out there is a method to the madness. You see, the Kabbalah says, I think this is in the Zohar that it's brought down for the first time, that Abraham embodied chesed, he embodied kindness to a fault, which means he was always kind no matter what. Even in situations where he didn't need to be kind, he was kind. Yitzchak, on the other hand, embodied gevura, he embodied firmness. He was always firm. He was always disciplinary, and everything was very strict and stringent, and you had to be in line, etc. Yaakov's main virtue lied in the fact that he represented Tiferet, a beautiful harmony of softness and firmness. The right time to praise and the right time to reprimand, the right time to reward and the right time to punish. The reason he was able to do that is because this perfect harmony takes its source from an attribute called emet. Emet is the Hebrew word for truth. The truth of chesed is not kindness. The truth of chesed is not softness. And the truth of gevura is not firmness. The truth of both of them is to leave a little bit of space for the other. That there's a time to be soft and there's a time to be firm. And actually being firm is sometimes kind and being soft is sometimes disciplinarian. In other words, they're all part of this beautiful balance that we have to strike when we're dealing with our children. In order to raise healthy children, we need to have the first half of today's lesson, praise, proper praise, good praise for our children, building their self-esteem in a healthy way. And we need to have discipline as well. We need to be able to tell our children off, again, in a healthy way, in the proper way, to punish them, to reprimand them, etc., in order to bring up healthy children. Now, depending on the child, that percentage might be 10%, 90, 90-10, or 50-50, or 40-60, or 60-40, right? Depending on who the child is and what they need and what by the way, because every child does have natural talents, and they do need more of something or more of the other. But as long as it's all coming from a place of love, from a place of caring for the child, you'll be able to detect what that percentage is. And Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, one of the greatest poskim, halachic rulers of this century, in text 16, and I think we'll ask Matt to read this one for us if you can, on page 151, really talks to this balance that we need to look to navigate.
There are no clear-cut rules with regard to successful child rearing, for all depends on the temperament that God granted the individual boy or girl. In some instances, it is more effective to proceed with a greater degree of firmness. In other instances, a greater measure of softness and pleasantness is preferable. For the majority of children, pleasantness and softness is the preferred path.
So, listen, I don't know your children, he says. I don't know what the percentage is. That's for you to decide. He says, but when in doubt, err on the side of kindness. Err on the side of softness. You should, no child needs 100% softness. So there's got to be some discipline going on inside the home. But you try to find the right balance with your children, but always err on the side of softness. Okay, so that is the conclusion of today's lesson. Now, in the remaining 5 minutes, what I'd like to do is leave you with 2 exercises for this week. Okay, one of them is the easier way out, the lazier way out, dare I say. The second one is a more challenging one. It's more advanced, but it's a much more eye-opening experience. Okay, let's start with the first one. The first one is much more reminiscent of the exercises we've done till today, which is, first of all, find at least one opportunity to praise your child. Obviously, their efforts, right? Offer praise, or offer deliberate praise that is intended to affect long-term change. And on the flip side, practice, right? Find one opportunity when you need to discipline your children. Find an opportunity to practice the 3 rules of loving, caring, discipline, which are summarized above on page 225. Okay. I'm sorry, that's the teacher's manual page. So by you guys, the 3 rules that we had before up on the screen. But I want to get to the second exercise. If you're up to it, this is advanced, takes a lot more effort, but it will provide a much more eye-opening experience. I challenge you over the next 7 days, not a long time, keep a journal of the feedback you give your children. It's very difficult because we tell our children lots of things all the time. It's probably going to be a few pages, right? Recording your feedback and then looking back at it will automatically make you more conscious of what you are saying, and it'll give you a heightened sense of accountability. You see, you're going to make a lot of mistakes this week. There's no chance you're not going to. But if you can afterwards analyze them and learn lessons from them based on what we learned today, then you'll be much wiser, and you will have taken a huge step forward in becoming a better parent for your children. With this, we'll conclude, and I'll ask you to turn your attention to the video screens for a summary of today's lesson.
Key points, Lesson 5. 1. Our children's self-worth is affected not so much by whether we reprimand or praise, but by how it is done. 2. We should always gear our praise to attaining larger goals, not to giving our children a temporary ego boost. 3. Praising effort is an effective educational tool, for it imparts value to something that the child can control. 4. In the Jewish tradition, effort, as opposed to the quality of the product, is supremely valued. Effort and toil constitute the reason for our existence. 5. Praising children's natural talents is counterproductive, for it imparts value to something that the child cannot control. 6. For praise to be effective, it must be sincere and honest. 7. Responding to our children's misbehavior demonstrates our care for them and their worth in our eyes. 8. Reprimand must flow from our palpable love and respect for our children. Never are we allowed to humiliate a child. 9. If we wait a little before addressing an issue that requires reprimand or discipline, children will usually be more receptive to critique, and we will be able to provide a thought-out, better, and more effective response. 10. We should always refer to misbehavior in the context of a child's greatness and incredible potential. 11. Proper and effective parenting is a blend of softness and firmness, a mixture personalized to meet our children's unique needs and sensitivities.
Thank you all for joining us for lesson 5 of the art of parenting, feedback and consequences. And we look forward to seeing you all next week as we conclude our course with lesson 6, the road to Jewish adulthood. Thank you all for joining.